Ken Paxton handily beat longtime incumbent John Cornyn in the Republican runoff for Senate. So what's that mean come November? Today on the Texas Standard.
Texas Standard is a production of KUT Austin, KERA North Texas, Houston Public Media, and Texas Public Radio in San Antonio.
I'm Laura Rice. We're also unpacking big primary runoff races from across the state on both sides of the aisle. What do the results tell us about what Texas voters are prioritizing? And did you vote in the primary runoffs? Congratulations, you may have added time to your life. The link between voting and living longer. The Trump administration just changed the way people should apply for green cards. They're now supposed to leave the U.S. to do so. We'll unpack the impacts. Plus, Mark Duplass and his wife Katie Aselton made a new movie about a married couple. We'll get a little personal in our conversation today on The Standard. Texas will have a new U.S. Senator in January for the first time in more than a dozen years. It's the Texas Standard for Wednesday, May 27th. I'm Laura Rice. For several elections now, Ted Cruz has been seen as the Republican Party's weaker candidate. First elected in 2012, it was Cruz that Democrats Beto O'Rourke and Colin Allred chose to target. But now, Texas's junior U.S. Senator will become its most tenured, as Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton defeated longtime incumbent John Cornyn in the primary runoff. Cornyn has been in that office since 2002, and in a legislative body that time has been rewarded. He's currently chairman of two important subcommittees. But in the eyes of some Texas Republicans, Cornyn's long tenure has also meant examples of bipartisanship, even gasp, compromise, reaching across the aisle, for instance, on a gun safety measure in the wake of the horrific Uvalde school shooting. Cornyn had more votes in the Republican primary than Paxton. He had more fundraising on hand, and in the weeks leading up to the runoff, they were polling neck and neck. But despite Cornyn's faithful support of President Trump, Trump's last-minute endorsement of Paxton appears to have made quite a difference. Paxton earned more than 60% of the vote. Here's John Cornyn last night.
I've said throughout this race that I trust the voters of Texas, and they've made their decision, and I must respect it.
For more on how we got here and what comes next, we turn to Blaze Gainey, who covers politics for the Texas Newsroom. Blaze, great to have you in the studio.
Love to be here.
And Lauren McGahee, who is a veteran of the Texas Newsroom, these days covering Texas for the New York Times. Lauren, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Blaze, is this a shocker or not? Paxton soundly defeated Cornyn. What do you make of this runoff and whether President Trump's endorsement tipped the scales?
I think it tipped it a little, but I think most political scientists I talked to and most people around politics thought that Paxton would win. This is a runoff election. Most have to remember that. There's not a lot of people participating, and the people who do participate are those who are really tuned in. You could call them extremists, and therefore that means that Paxton, who's seen as the more MAGA-like or extreme candidate, whatever word you want to use to characterize it, got more voters to come out. More of his base than Cornyn's base was out to vote during runoffs, and I think that's what this shows. Which is, as you said in the opener there, that in the primary, Cornyn did just fine when a lot of people were coming out to vote. Remember, we had historic numbers, but when you have a smaller amount of numbers, a smaller part of the population can make up a bigger percentage, and that's, I think, what we saw last night. So, did Trump do anything? I mean, yes, it's good that he has his endorsement, but I don't think it necessarily was a win or lose situation.
Lauren, you've covered Ken Paxton for years. Tell us about his rise from Texas Attorney General to now being the GOP nominee for U.S. Senate.
Right. You know, it's interesting to hear this race kind of be categorized as a longtime incumbent versus some insurgent figure in Ken Paxton, because he's been an elected official also since 2002.
Yeah,
he was in the state house and then the Senate and then attorney general for 10 years. So he's been around for a long time. But, you know, he's really successfully always pitched himself as one of the most conservative leaders in the statewide ticket in Texas. And, we did a big profile on him recently where people were describing him as kind of Trump before Trump was even elected. He had these scandals. He always played them off as, enemies from within that were attacking him for being too conservative. And he was successful in kind of shrugging all of those off and continuing to be reelected time and again, even with that baggage.
Well, what do you make of what Blaze said, Lauren? I mean, does this say something about the GOP in Texas right now, or is this just a very small percentage of those most motivated to show up and vote?
Well, I think the whole ticket does say something about Republicans in Texas. If you look from Ken Paxton and then you look at the other statewide elected Republican nominees now, all of them were either an anti-incumbent or an insurgent candidate, someone from the hardline part of the party or someone running against and successfully ousting an incumbent. So, I do think that there is a bit of this, kind of incumbency stink happening right now where people have been in elected office for a long time, and that is not playing well for them. And, we're just going to have to see what happens in November. But, I have to remind folks that Paxton has been elected statewide by the entirety of the Texas electorate multiple times, even with these scandals. So, while he might face a little bit more of an uphill race against a Tallarico, he's been in this place before. The Texans have elected him time and again. So we'll just have to see whether this time is yet again another win for him.
Well, you brought it up, Lauren. Let's go there now. Looking ahead to November. Blaze, we heard from both Paxton and Democratic Senate nominee James Tallarico last night. Tell us about what they said and how that's setting the tone for their campaigns.
Yeah, I mean, right out of the gate, during his victory speech, essentially, Paxton fired off towards Tallarico, and Tallarico dropped an ad right away.
Something just happened in Texas. The most corrupt politician in America just became the Republican nominee for the United States Senate.
My opponent is the most extreme radical the Democrats have ever nominated. He's even running a vegan campaign, whatever that is.
What is a vegan campaign? Has Tallarico said that? Is that a thing?
I don't think he said that.
No. One of his previous runs for state house, his campaign went vegetarian, and so that clip has been pulled out. His campaign said they're not running a vegan campaign, but he did at one point in a previous race. His campaign staff went vegetarian,
and that was like back during COVID.
That was
okay.
Because he had a mask on in that video.
And he hated potato, egg, and cheese tacos. So,
but it's really interesting that people are still using that,
right,
even though he clearly has a mask on his face in the video, and using it as if he's talking today. But anyways,
Blaze, there were Cornyn supporters who said they couldn't vote for Paxton. Do you think Tallarico actually has a chance of pulling voters from the middle?
I do think he has a chance, more so because if you voted against Paxton this time around, even after Trump's endorsement, to me that means that you were voting against Trump essentially, or a MAGA-like candidate. Now, the question is, will they get out to vote for a Democrat, or will they just stay home? So that'll be the question we have until November. But it'll be interesting to see whether he can really pull enough voters over, because as we know, Republicans have dominated the state. So we'll just have to see how the numbers play out later on.
Lauren, let's talk about some other statewide runoffs last night, starting with that opening for Attorney General, since Paxton's now running for Senate. What happened there?
Yeah, this was another kind of Trump-coded race. We had Mays Middleton, who's a state senator, a self-funded campaign. He's a wealthy guy, oil and gas magnate, versus Chip Roy, a congressman who's at times kind of butted heads pretty publicly with the president. And the race won solidly for Mays Middleton. There was a lot of money that came in in the very last week for Chip Roy from a single moneyed donor, and it just wasn't enough to beat Mays Middleton's message. And he really hammered Chip Roy on not being loyal enough to the president, and that seemed to play well for him.
Blaze, we also had a Democratic runoff for lieutenant governor. Tell us about Vicki Goodwin's race.
Yeah, Representative Vicki Goodwin beat Marcos Velez by nearly 35 points. Sort of surprising. I mean, he did force it to a runoff, so you maybe think it'd be closer, but he doesn't really have as much name recognition as Representative Vicki Goodwin. Obviously, I have to say representative when I say her name. So she's already elected. She didn't, I think she avoided the whole we're against incumbency because she's not so known and so big in the state that people would be like, oh, she's been there too long. And Marcos Velez is so new that I think people were just sort of taken aback. Also, I mean, we'll have to see how things turn out in the general election, but Vicki Goodwin being a representative already, going for a seat like lieutenant governor, she says somebody getting that position needs to have experience, and I think that also played a part into this.
Well, Lauren, we'll get into Texas House runoff races a little later in the show, but any other takeaways from you from last night?
Yeah, I also just wanted to mention, since we have a call in the race, that there was another statewide race on the Republican side for Railroad Commission. This is the important statewide body that regulates oil and gas, which is particularly important right now with all the market shocks we have because of the Iran war. That runoff went again for the more hardline candidate, Beau French. He challenged the incumbent chairman and very, very narrowly won, but he did pull out a win. He's probably the most hardline, the most far right of the candidates on the statewide slate. And I think his race against State Representative John Rosenthal will be really, really interesting to watch ahead of November.
Interesting. All right. I mean, this is a race that probably a lot of Texans kind of take for granted, don't pay a lot of attention to going into November. But it sounds like you'd encourage them, Lauren, to pay a bit more attention, especially because this seems like this could be a big outcome if Beau French has some different plans for the Railroad Commission.
Yeah, it's a really important job in Texas, often overlooked outside of the state and sometimes even within, but a vital regulatory body for oil and gas. Texas produces 40% of the nation's crude oil. And so we're really, right there at the center of our nation's oil portfolio.
Yeah, right. I think it should be added that Beau French beat Jim Wright, who was backed by Abbott and sort of the top Republicans in the state as well. I think that was a big win for Beau French.
Huge win.
Yeah, I mean, once you're backed by Abbott, Patrick, it's sort of like you're likely to win.
The path is clear. Yeah,
exactly. So Jim Wright, an incumbent, once again losing. It is definitely interesting, and that also will be an interesting race. I agree with Lauren.
Blaise Gainey covers politics for the Texas Newsroom, and Lauren McGahee covers Texas politics for the New York Times. Thank you both, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Well, as I mentioned, we'll be digging into more election results a little later in the program, but you can find them right now at texasstandard.org. You can also keep up with us via social media or get twice weekly newsletter updates for us. Again, you can sign up at texasstandard.org. Still ahead, did you vote? Well, hey, life may be longer now.
Support for Texas Standard comes from H-E-B and the My H-E-B app, which is available for download, and shopping fresh departments like seafood, produce, bakery, and deli, and scheduling curbside pickup or home delivery. More at HEB.com. Support for Texas Standard comes from Texas Mutual Insurance Company, committed to strengthening the state's workforce and its communities through safety and wellness grants and education initiatives. More at texasmutual.com/community impact.
This is the Texas Standard. I'm Laura Rice. Close to 2 million Texans cast a ballot in the primary runoffs. That's about 10% of the total number of registered Texas voters. It's typical of the low turnout expected for an election like this one, despite the serious stakes of picking a party candidate for the fall. But here's a sweetener for those who did vote. You may live longer. A new study suggests there's a link between voting and reduced mortality risk. TPR's David Martin Davies reports.
Pamela Davison has just finished early voting in the Texas primary runoff, and on the way back to her car, she has a bit of a spring in her step.
If I love to vote, I always vote.
The 74-year-old was a little taken back when I told her about a recent study that found that voting increases your chances of living longer.
Doesn't seem too logical, but I'd like to think it's true.
76-year-old Molly McGarrett Davis is also voting early, and she does see how voting could have a personal benefit.
Well, I think voting means that I care. And I care about how my communities run, how my cities run. And it matters for the quality of my life and other people's lives. And I'm interested in my community.
And that connection to community and society could be the secret sauce that links voting and longer living, according to Femida Handy from the University of Pennsylvania School of Social Policy and Practice. She co-authored a paper published in the Journal of Gerontology Series B titled Voting Behavior and Mortality Risk in Older Adults. Handy says she was actually surprised by the finding.
Because the results were so striking, we had to rerun the data.
The researchers looked at the data in the Wisconsin longitudinal study, one of the longest-running social science studies in the United States. It began in 1957 with a random sampling of more than 10,000 Wisconsin high school graduates. It's been following them ever since. After filtering out factors that could affect mortality, like income and volunteering, Handy concluded that older adult voters, compared to non-voters, had a 45% lower mortality risk 5 years after voting. Also, individuals in poorer health seemed to benefit more from voting.
And we've also noticed that it didn't matter what their political affiliation was.
So vote Republican or Democrat, same benefit. And it's not the actual physical act of going to go vote that does the trick.
Even those who had voted remotely have a decreased mortality risk.
Voting by mail still showed reduced mortality risk. But Handy is quick to point out that there is no cause and effect with voting and living longer. In other words, voting itself doesn't boost your lifespan. There is no magic in sporting that I voted sticker. But earning that I voted sticker is a different story.
When I go out and vote and I put the I voted sticker, I feel good about myself. That when you think you've done something good, it makes you feel good. And when we feel good, we know we've got lots of neurochemistry.
Unlocking the neural reward centers reduces our stress hormones and delivers multiple health benefits. Neurologist and science communicator Ben Ryan says the connection between voting and living longer makes sense to him.
I think it's really interesting.
He's the author of Why Brains Need Friends, the Neuroscience of Social Connection. He was not part of the voting and mortality study.
Voting isn't a medication that, extends your life, right? It feels like people who vote are also something else, and that something else is positively related to longevity.
Ryan says there is a massive amount of research that shows a relationship between being involved in one's community and health.
You're just doing this because you believe in it, because you think you're part of a community, you have a sense of purpose, and you want to vote, you want to make a difference.
Handy says she would like to follow up with a larger study and do more research. In the meantime, she says people should go vote. I'm David Martin Davies in San Antonio.
And you're listening to the Texas Standard. The Texas General Land Office website says, quote, walking along the beach in Texas has been a privilege since Texas was a republic. Many of us do enjoy a Gulf Coast beach stroll. Are you a right on the edge of the water person, or do you like the softer stuff further up, or even exploring the high tide section where neat things wash up? Well, a lot of times these walks are at a leisurely pace, but Texas Standard commentator W.F. Strong remembers a different sort of beach walk.
It was a race to see who could walk from South Padre to North Padre the fastest. No running. If you ran, you were disqualified. In fact, there was no thought of ultramarathons in those days. Such ideas were immediately dismissed as beyond human capacity. This race was dreamed up by Cash Asher as publicity for the island. He called it the Padre Island Walkathon. Writer Davy Crockett provided a splendid history of the event for the Ultra Runner History site that I have relied on here for the details of the event, and yes, that is his real name, Davy Crockett. He said that the race was from Friday to Sunday, starting on March 27th, 1953. The oldest walker was 67 years old, and the youngest starter was 15. The race began at 6:30 in the morning. There were 70 participants. Within a few hours, there were only 50. The wind whipping up the sand discouraged weak resolves quickly. The first day was restricted to 25 miles. Jesse Shamblin, 42, came in first at 5:32 p.m. Bonnie White and Beth Brillhart came in tied at second, about an hour behind Jesse. The fact that women were invited to participate was quite progressive. Such integration of the sexes was not common in those days. Camp 1 at 25 miles had only 29 overnighters. More than half the starters had already dropped out. Those still in the race were fed well and provided with tents to get a good night's sleep. Day 2 began at 6:45 a.m. They had 42 miles to cover on the second day, 42 miles over sand. No wonder 20 dropped out the second day. Blisters claimed victory over walkers in many cases. Interestingly, those with leather shoes fared better than those with canvas shoes. Day 3 saw only 6 racers at the starting line, with 43 miles to go. 3 crossed the finish line that day. First place went to Jesse Shamblin of McAllen with a walking time of 28 hours and 48 minutes. He won $250. The second place went to Frank Jareco at 31 hours. He got $50. And cheers for the 15-year-old Boy Scout who came prepared and walked away with $40. This event was continued each year until 1969, but after the Port Mansfield Cut was dug, they shortened the race to just 40 miles. It was just a one-day event then, and held only at the north end of the island near Corpus. I think they should bring back the original, and during spring break. All those college kids with unlimited energy and stamina would make it a fascinating event. The Port Mansfield Cut would require a brisk, refreshing swim across the channel. It would add a little Ironman challenge 30 miles in, and maybe, continuing with that theme, there could be a day of beach cycling, but only with those one-speed bikes with the big tires. I would even participate myself. Well, participate as support crew. I would drive the beer truck. I'm W.F. Strong. These are stories from Texas. Some of them are true.
W.F. Strong is a professor of culture and communication at the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley. You can find more stories from Texas at texasstandard.org or wherever you get your podcasts.
From the Texas Newsroom, I'm Tom Perumian. Texas voters decided several high-profile runoff races Tuesday night, including a nationally watched Republican U.S. Senate primary. The Texas Newsroom's Lucio Vasquez reports.
Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton defeated incumbent Senator John Cornyn in the Republican runoff for U.S. Senate. Paxton will face Democrat James Tellerico in the general election this fall. In the race for Attorney General, Republican State Senator Mays Middleton defeated U.S. Representative Chip Roy. Middleton will be running against State Senator Nathan Johnson, who won the Democrats' runoff for AG on Tuesday. Democrat Vicki Goodwin also won her party's runoff for Lieutenant Governor. She'll challenge longtime incumbent Republican Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick in November. I'm Lucio Vasquez in Houston.
Senator John Cornyn conceded defeat during a speech to supporters in Austin, while also talking about how low voter turnout impacted the election.
In this runoff election, approximately 8% of registered voters made their voices heard. And of that 8% who voted, roughly 60% said they were ready for a different direction.
Paxton's opponent in November is State Representative James Tellerico. He labeled the upcoming race the People versus Ken Paxton while highlighting Paxton's legal troubles.
If we, the people, can come together to defeat the most corrupt politician in America, we can defeat this entire corrupt system. We can start unrigging this economy.
Bexar County Sheriff's Deputy Johnny Garcia has won the Democratic primary runoff for Texas's 35th congressional district. He defeated Maureen Galindo in a race that became one of the most closely watched Democratic contests in Texas.
Galindo finished first in the March primary, but her runoff campaign was mired by controversy after making repeated inflammatory remarks about Israel and Zionists. Garcia said the more voters learned about Galindo, the more they rejected her.
Once the community figured out what she stood for, to divide our communities rather than focus on everyday issues affecting everyday Texans.
Garcia will face Republican Carlos de la Cruz in the general election. I'm David Martin Davies in San Antonio.
Former Tarrant County GOP Chairman Beau French has declared victory over Texas Railroad Commissioner Jim Wright. French has drawn controversy for his focus on culture war issues. Former Congressman Colin Allred is advancing to the November general election in Dallas County after defeating incumbent Julie Johnson. I'm Tom Perumian from the Texas Newsroom.
Support for these Texas headlines comes from Half Price Books, a Texas-bred new and used bookstore, proudly supporting public media and sustainability by keeping books, music, and other media in circulation. Store locations and more information at hpb.com.
33 minutes past the hour, Texas Standard Time. I'm David Brown. Friday afternoon, just before the holiday weekend got started, the Trump administration announced a change to the way people apply for green cards. Foreigners in the U.S. who want a green card will now have to leave the U.S. and apply in their home country. This is a change to a long-standing system where people already living in the U.S. could apply for green cards while still in this country. Here to tell us more is Rebecca Santana, who covers the Department of Homeland Security for the AP. Rebecca, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the basics of how the green card application system has worked for the last, about 50 years or so?
Yes, there has been this long-standing process where people can do what's called an adjustment of status. So you adjust, you get a green card. And a lot of people can do that in the United States as opposed to going back to their home country or doing it just from their home country. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people every year. So when they made this announcement on Friday, it was quite big news that potentially you would have to go back to your home country to apply for a green card, except in extraordinary circumstances.
So just to be clear, we're talking about people who have already been in the country on approved official status, like, for instance, someone who was here on a student visa, for example, or maybe even spouses who have come in, approved as a spouse. Does this mean that they'll have to go back home and get a new green card, or what?
Well, there is, as you mentioned, there's a whole host of different types of reasons why someone would be in the U.S. They could be a student. They could be working on an H-1B visa. They could be, maybe they have a child who is a U.S. citizen. There's just a huge range of people that are potentially affected by this. There was also a memo that came out, and this memo goes out to the USCIS officers who actually have to decide these cases.
CIS, Citizen and Immigration Services.
Exactly, yes. And that memo, some of the immigration lawyers and people we've talked to said that one was a little bit more nuanced. And it basically was guidance to these officers telling them how they should adjudicate these cases, how they decide these cases. Essentially that they have to be a little bit more skeptical in deciding these cases and whether the people that they're deciding, whether they meet this new standard.
This is kind of important because in its initial announcement, USCIS, Citizen and Immigration Services, said it would only issue a green card inside the country in extraordinary circumstances, which is why this has become such a big part of the news conversation right now. However, if I understand you correctly, the policy memo that went out to the individual adjudicators basically says, well, we're actually asking you just to exercise more caution before issuing a green card. Do I have that right?
That's about it. It's going to be very important, the particulars of everyone's case. It's going to be, each one will be decided on a case-by-case basis. We've talked with lawyers who have been poring over these documents over the weekend and really trying to understand what they mean for their clients. And it will come down to everyone's particular case and whether they should go ahead and apply in the U.S., whether they might qualify for these exceptions, or whether they meet this extraordinary circumstance. And so it's really hard to say, broadly speaking, what it will mean in everybody's different cases.
Is it clear why this change was made after so many decades?
It's not particularly clear why they came out at this point and said this. This announcement took everyone that we talked to by surprise, and they were trying to understand what it means. But it is, USCIS has described it as going back to the way things have been for a long time. But it was a very big, surprising announcement to a lot of people that we talked to.
And what about when it takes effect?
We have talked with immigration lawyers right now who have already started to see changes yesterday. So people who are going to their hearings or their meetings with the USCIS and were asked questions about, generally in the range of, could you go back to your home country and apply through consular processing, what's called going through the State Department. So it's already, having some impact on the ground.
What do you see as the big picture here, Rebecca?
It's important to note that this is part of a wider move that the Trump administration has been taking that really addresses legal immigration. People know about ICE, what they've been doing across the country against illegal immigration. But really, USCIS has been making a lot of changes that in a lot of ways make it more difficult for people who are already here in the U.S. to stay, or for people who want to come to the U.S. from abroad to come here.
Rebecca Santana covers the Department of Homeland Security for the AP. We'll link to her latest reporting, texasstandard.org. Rebecca, thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
Support for Texas Standard comes from University Extension at UT Austin, offering open enrollment to a wide variety of UT's undergraduate credit courses that can be taken by anyone from anywhere. Learn more at extension.utexas.edu. Support for Texas Standard comes from Texas CASA. For a child in foster care, small moments today can have a big impact tomorrow. More on how lending time and support can help make a difference at becomeacasa.org.
You've got it tuned to the Texas Standard. I'm Laura Rice. Filmmakers Jay and Mark Duplass honed their craft at UT Austin, and though they weren't Texas natives and now mostly live in LA, they're still kind of claimed as locals. Mark's wife, Katie Aselton, has also been part of the filmmaking crew from the early days of their beloved film, The Puffy Chair. That was 2005. Flash forward more than 20 years, and they're all still making movies with relatively low budgets and small crews. Magic Hour hits theaters in Texas this weekend. It's written by the couple, produced by the brothers, and directed by and stars Aselton, alongside Daveed Diggs, just to widen the circle a tad. I had a chance to talk about all of this with them over Zoom recently.
What's up, friend?
Oh, well, congratulations. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank
I
you
wanted
so
to ask
much.
you about the Austin connection. Magic Hour premiered at South by Southwest.
Mhm.
Is Austin still important to you guys and your filmmaking journey, even as you sort of moved on from this as hometown?
Well, I mean, Austin to me is sort of the epicenter of who I am as an artist in more ways than one. I think for me personally, I moved there in 95 to go to school at UT, but I've been coming there since 91 when Jay was in college, and people were living in South Austin off of very little money, making their art, and it was not about getting it out into the world. It was about making art and subsisting, and it was so edifying for me. And so I think that when we talked about making a movie like Magic Hour, the two of us really, I think, are at our best and happiest when we've got a small group of people making a very personal story, which to me is like what I was doing in Austin back in the day. So it's really part and parcel with the town for me.
And I have definitely a less personal connection, but Austin's just one of my favorite cities in the whole world. South by to me is like the perfect film festival.
Yeah.
They get it so right. The curation of the movies is great. The parties are great. I've gotten to go with a couple of my films now, and it's kind of the best one.
Well, as we get into Magic Hour, I feel like I'm going to ask you guys a bunch of really personal questions because you're married people that made a movie about married people.
Yeah.
And so I sort of feel like you opened yourselves up to this. And
Yeah.
But it's also everything, like the only thing we've ever done is
Yes.
to make movies that are sort of about us, but not really about us, but like totally about us.
But I like that your question is like, you asked for this. So let's go.
So Kate, I heard you say that this movie was written primarily through like a voice memo or a voice note on your phone.
It came. So Mark and I do try and do this trip every January, like just after the holidays. We've got 2 kids, and the holidays are just such a mad push to the end. And
It's really a perfect way to lose yourselves as a couple, is to just like put all of your energy into family and events and everything.
hosting and the whole thing. And it's, exhausting. So we love this trip in like the beginning of January when the kids go back to school. We try and do like a long weekend that is just like not just a reset, but like a recentering.
Just the 2 of us.
Just the 2 of us. And we had driven up to Big Sur, and we were driving back, and Mark was like, what do you want from this year? It was like it's like that quintessential New Year's conversation. What do you want from this year? I was like, I want to make a movie. And I want to go back to the way we used to make movies and not worry about the outcome and just make something that feels like it is like deeply personal and us. And so he was like, great, well, let's figure it out. And so we started talking about like hypotheticals and really sort of digging into this idea of codependency and like healthy codependency, but how healthy is codependency? But also, isn't that the goal of romance and love, is to like not be able to live without someone? Like that is sort of like what all of the country music lyrics have taught us. And this idea of Magic Hour, the story of Magic Hour, just started flowing. And we started doing this voice to text memo in my notes app over the course of this 6.5-hour drive. And if you look at it today, it's like very, very close to what the movie is.
How great is it to feel like, I don't know if I can survive without this person in my life. But I know if you go to a therapist and you talk about that, like codependency is a 4-letter word, except there's some elements of that we kind of feel like, well, maybe we own it. And I think the confusing feeling about that, and the fact that we didn't have a stance and could use the movie to explore that a little bit, somewhat agnostically, was what got me excited.
There's a device that you use in the film, which is them sending videos back and forth to one another to help tell the story. Is that a way that you guys communicate at all, or no?
No, we don't. But I love that device as like a tool to sort of show who they were. And I like the idea of a movie that has basically 2 people in the frame for the whole time, and you know them a certain way, and you pull someone out of the frame, but you're still engaged in a conversation with that person. How do they look and feel different? And I think for me, when I look at the movie and I see them solo in the frame, in particular, watching David's character solo in the frame, he's still charming. He's still interesting, but there's like a soul sickness about him, and there's like a sadness about him that, to me, is very close to how I am when I'm away from my family.
In this film in particular, like all of the cell phone videos, you realize that like when we're with them in the desert, there's no technology. Like there's no TV, there's no phones. At one point, there's like an answering machine, but it's sort of devoid of all contact.
Well, I don't want to not talk more about Magic Hour, but it's so easy to get into spoilers that I want to avoid.
Thank you.
A lot of really exciting, interesting things that happen. What else do you guys want to know about this film as they head into theaters?
Well, I will share like some interesting surprises. You make a movie and you think you know what it's about, and then you show it to an audience, and then they tell you what it's about. And we've learned this in Austin. We've learned this as we've shown this movie in theaters across the U.S. and now around the world, is that there's this thing about connection and romantic connection in particular that we so deeply value. And I think it's because it's part of the legacy of our stories, and there are people who say, I'm not a romantic, but I think to a certain degree, we're all romantics and we all want that. As we've shown this movie, we've noticed everybody sticks around for the Q&A. And so I would just say, like, come to this movie and bring someone that you love or that you used to love or that you would like to love. And like, come have these conversations. And Katie and I are going to try to do as many like in-person Q&As. We're going to travel around the country a lot.
It really is, as you know, as of right now, like, it's a really fun movie to talk about and to go deep on, because I think everyone has their own feelings about it.
Yeah.
Katie Aselton and Mark Duplass wrote Magic Hour. Katie also directed and stars in the film. It's in limited theaters in Texas now. You can watch an extended video version of this interview at texasstandard.org or on our YouTube page.
Support for Texas Standard comes from the online UT High School, offering a full-time diploma program for remote, asynchronous learners throughout Texas. More at highschool.utexas.edu/tuition-free.
This is the Texas Standard. I'm Laura Rice. The runoff between Senator John Cornyn and Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton for U.S. Senate received the lion's share of the attention this primary season. But on the other side of the U.S. Capitol, the House of Representatives will have plenty of new faces from Texas after the elections in November. The next Texas congressional delegation came into a little sharper focus after yesterday's runoffs. Gabby Birnbaum is Washington, D.C. correspondent for the Texas Tribune. Gabby, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
We're also joined by Mark Jones, a political science professor at Rice University. Professor, thanks so much for your time.
Oh, thanks for having me as well.
Well, Gabby, Texas's U.S. House districts were redrawn last year at the request of President Trump to give Republicans an opportunity to win more seats. Overall, what impacts have we seen from the new map so far?
Yeah, I think the most interesting impact, and this was true in the Senate race as well, was that in these highly competitive seats that are expected to be competitive for both parties, President Trump sort of got the candidate he wanted. We saw that in Texas 35, which is a Trump plus 10 seat in San Antonio and surrounding counties. His preferred candidate, Carlos de la Cruz, that's the brother of Monica, advanced last night. Democrats got Johnny Garcia, their preferred candidate, against a progressive who had been sort of maligned by much of the party for anti-Semitic views. So that was sort of the major story. But then also, you know, in Texas 9, which Republicans redrew in the Houston area to be preferable to them, Trump got his preferred candidate, Alex Mueller, over State Rep Briscoe Cain. So in two of those races, the Trump candidate won over the state reps on the Republican side who, you know, voted for the map. So just sort of an interesting trend there.
Well, I want to dig in first to that Houston district that Gabby was referring to. Professor Jones, State Representative Briscoe Cain, as she mentioned, lost his race to Alex Mueller, who'd previously run for Harris County judge. And that race doesn't look like it was particularly close. Am I right?
No, it was not close at all. Mueller won by a pretty dramatic margin. Having the endorsement of President Trump, as well as having far more financial resources than Cain did, really helped seal the deal for her. Coming from a March first round when the election was relatively close, Mueller won, but only by the mid-single digits. This is, I think, a good election for Republicans because while District 9 leans heavily Republican, it is the one congressional district in the Houston metro area that is somewhat up for grabs in the fall. And having Mueller as the Republican nominee makes it far more likely that Republicans will be able to hold on to that seat, given that she has much more crossover appeal than Briscoe Cain has.
Now, Professor, for Houston Democrats, Representative Al Green used to be in District 9, got redrawn and then lost in the new district to Christian Menifee. What do we know about why Menifee was able to unseat Green?
Well, that was an interesting district because effectively two African-American represented districts, District 9 and 18, were merged together into one. And while Democratic primary voters in Congressional District 18 really liked both Al Green and Christian Menifee, they could only send one of them back to Congress. In this case, they went with the younger, more dynamic Menifee over the older, more established Green.
Well, Gabby, kind of a similar dynamic in the Dallas area between former Representative Colin Allred and current Representative Julie Johnson. Voters liked both but could only pick one. This is another race that was forged through recent redistricting, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This was a seat that is about a third of each of the prior Democratic represented Dallas-based seats, DFW seats. So you had a relatively new electorate to both of these candidates. The difference being that Colin Allred, ran statewide in 2024. He was the Democratic Senate nominee. He had, higher name ID than Julie Johnson. And so I think you saw that definitely play a role here in both the primary and the runoff when Allred won by about 10 points.
Now that the ballots for November's general election are set, are there any races, Gabby, that you plan to keep a particular close eye on?
Yeah, I think there's 4 in South Texas that are going to be competitive. You've got Henry Cuellar and Vicente Gonzalez, 2 Democrats who have held on in Trump-backed seats, and now their seats were redrawn to be even more Trump-friendly. So those will be interesting, one in Laredo and one in Brownsville. You've got Texas 15, which is Monica de la Cruz's seat. That's currently the only Republican-held seat in South Texas, and you've got Bobby Polito challenging her as a Democrat. He's sort of hoping to run as a centrist and make a splash there. And then now, as I mentioned, in 35, Monica's brother, Carlos de la Cruz, running against D-Trip-backed Johnny Garcia, who's, again, a centrist, sort of moderate blue dog Democrat. So I think we're going to get sort of a test of if these centrist Democrats can hold on in these majority Latino Trump-backed seats in South Texas. It'll be sort of a good test case for what's going on with Latino voters in South Texas and in the Valley.
All right, Gabby's watching South Texas. What sticks out to you, Professor Jones, as we look toward November?
Well, I would say those 4 districts down in South Texas where, given Donald Trump's declining approval ratings, both Congressman Cuellar out of Laredo and Congressman Gonzalez out of Brownsville, I think, look in an increasingly solid position. And actually, the most vulnerable South Texas incumbent is likely to be Republican Monica de la Cruz, who's in a district that is very different from the district she currently represents in terms of the composition. And unlike, say, in some other cases, Democrats chose and were able to recruit a very talented candidate in Bobby Polito to run against her. The one other election I would probably add to those would be Congressional District 23, which spreads out from San Antonio down to Maverick County and out to the lower El Paso Valley, where Brandon Herrera is a relatively controversial candidate. And while that district is normally pretty Republican, in a bad election year, that's another one that Republicans could potentially lose.
So, Professor, I guess overall, does it look like the plan to, add Republicans to the U.S. House from Texas, does that look like it's shaping up to work in Trump's favor?
At the margins, it might add 1 or 2 seats. District 32 up in Dallas is pretty much a lock for Republicans. And now with Alex Mueller in Congressional District 9 here in Houston, that one looks pretty solid for Republicans as well. 35 down in San Antonio is kind of a toss-up. But if as a result they lose 15, all of that work and all of those changes may have a net gain for Republicans of 2 seats or 1 seat.
Mark Jones is a political science professor at Rice University, and Gabby Birnbaum is Washington, D.C. correspondent for the Texas Tribune. Thank you both again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And you're listening to the Texas Standard. And here in the studio with me now is audience and engagement editor Wells Dunbar, monitoring the talk of Texas.
That's right. So much to monitor, too, here the day after the primary runoff elections. I got to get in a plug here for the newsletter. Go to texasstandard.org/newsletter to sign up because, honestly, it's a great way just to recap all this stuff. So much reporting from our friends at partner stations around the state on the important races that were decided there in places like Dallas, San Antonio, and so forth. These statewide races, maybe some of the ones a little under the radar that we haven't been following quite as closely. Quite the story there in this Republican runoff for the Railroad Commission, where one Beau French appears to be the apparent winner in a very close contest there. Controversial past with a history of anti-Semitic and racist remarks. We talked about and linked to some information there about it in the newsletter. So again, if you haven't had a chance there, go to texasstandard.org/newsletter. There we go.
Absolutely.
To
You do
sign up.
such a great job with this, Wells. It really is a great way to catch up on the things you missed or to follow up. You heard it on the radio, but you're like, hey, what was the details of that? Let me dig in. I wanted to share that with a friend. Easy peasy right there with the newsletter. Thank you so much for listening here on the Texas Standard. See you back here tomorrow.
Philanthropic support for Texas Standard comes from Casey and Scott O'Hare, the Winkler Family Foundation, Lynn Dobson and Greg Waldridge, Adrian Killam, the George Huntington Family, and St. David's Foundation. Additionally, Texas Mutual Insurance Company is a founding sponsor of Texas Standard.